She spent over 10 years turning one of Nigerian's institutions into a 1,570 member continental network. Then, at the peak, she walked away on purpose. My guest today has spent almost 4 decades doing something that many people in even two careers would not attempt. She's rebuilt institutions that she's inside from ground up. She's done that again and again. She started in the Treasury Department of Nigerian banks. She moved into global consulting at PwC. Then she took on a specialist financial training body that really works with Nigerian banks. And she built the members of this organization that includes bank deposit institutions in the country and grew it into what is about over 1,600 institutions, network of institutions across the African continent. And then guess what? Instead of moving to the next obvious job within the ranks, she stepped back. She went into INSEAD to study what? Corporate governance at board level. She went ahead, wrote a book that is making lots of high-level conversations across the continent and globally. She reemerged after all this as one of Africa's sharpest voices that is translating the African Continental Free Trade Agreement from a political agreement into an actual private sector reality. Today, she chairs the advisory board and executive boards of the African Private Sector Summit, and she is telling everyone who cares to listen that Africa's private sector is too fragmented to capture what AfCFTA promises unless the institutions get built right. Dr. Lucy Newman, you are welcome to the Clarity Mandate.
Thank you, Dr. Atud. It's a pleasure to be here and it's good to reconnect. And well done for what you're doing. It's very inspiring and I feel very honored to be with you today.
Amazing having you as a big sister. I've looked up to you. We've worked together doing some work years back at African Peer Review Mechanism, and it was always a pleasure to tap from your wisdom. And it's even great knowing the things you've done after that with the African Private Sector Summit. We'll be excited to know more about that. You spent 9 years inside Nigerian banks, if I'm right, treasury marketing, product development, post-merger integration, before you even ran an institution yourself. What did those years inside the machinery of banking teach you about how institutions actually work that you could not have learned them any other way?
Thank you very much. Yes, in those years, I got an insight. Earlier on in my career, I was working with a Borno investment company, which was an investment company. And we're taking over companies that were not doing so well. And I was representing the organization at the annual general meetings. And I found out that many organizations get liquidated because of poor financial management and management incompetence. So naturally, when I had a career in banking, I wanted to go to the treasury, which is the heart of the banking system. And I wanted to know how money is received, money is expended, money is turned around and turned out as profits. So where could I have gone other than the treasury? And in the treasury, I also learned the issue of product development. You can ask people to just bring their money, but you need to give a value for them to part with their funds. And product development was very good for me because it helped hone my research skills in terms of market intelligence and brand positioning. So in those years, I am very grateful that I had that opportunity because if I had not gone into the treasury, I might not understand the big picture of how money moves in businesses and around businesses and in economic systems. And now, as I'm talking about trade, I also understand the value to corporates that actually engage in trades and the challenges of the MSMEs.
Wow, that is so powerful. You had to learn all this working inside the financial sector, but then you left. You took FITC, a Nigerian financial sector professional body, and grew it to it over 10 years period, I think, if I'm right, into a network of about 1,560 or 570 or maybe 1,600 stakeholders across the African continent and beyond. Institutions that size don't grow by accident, in my estimation. So, what was the single hardest structural change that you had to make to get there?
Thank you very much. I am very grateful to a founding document that was evidence based. There was a study by the Pius Okibo Committee that was led and is initiated by the late Oba, who was a central bank officer at that time, and they studied the financial system. And they found out that capacity building for banks was very important because as at that time we had foreign banks and the national banks were not doing too well. So they needed to build the capacity of the Nigerian banks, which I feel very honored today to see what the Nigerian banks are doing on the African continent to build the capacity of Nigerian banks. And one of the first things I did was I found a copy and I read it. And I saw that as at the time that I resumed, FITC was a maturing organization, 28 years old, and not too much in touch with the system, with the ecosystem, and many of the members were not too happy. So that engagement gave me, I also took time to engage all the former heads of that organization, those who had been CEO that were still living, and those who were chairmen that were still living. I asked them two questions. Looking back in time, what do they wish they would have done at that time? And what do they think we should focus on going forward? So that engagement gave me the goodwill and it also gave me the insight to do a massive restructuring, after which I knew that stakeholder engagement was very important. And then I saw that Nigerian banks were growing outside the country and we needed to be in networks that were not just Nigerian banks. And I became a very strong member of the West African Bankers Association. And then when we had referral by the IFC to the Africa Corporate Governance Network, that was also a very good platform for us to belong to. Little did we know later that IFC was going to come calling, and in that process, we got connected to the Financial Accrediting Agency of Malaysia. And then we developed our competency. And what we're doing as nonprofit, I knew that for us to engage our stakeholders very well, the staff must be trained. They must have finesse and polish and understanding of the mandate. For that, I'm very grateful to my work at PwC. PwC is a global professional services organization, and I had the privilege and some partners who put me through some things. So I was able to replicate all those things in a little FITC. And before we knew it, we got awards as a nonprofit for Great Place to Work, and our people were being developed. So these things were very important for us. Engagement of the stakeholder, investment in the employees, and then the services. We saw ourselves transitioning from short-term handholding report kind of interventions to 8-year-long handholding implementation programs on retainership. So that deepened our professional practice. And by that also I had the privilege to stand in front of bank directors and all that and talk about corporate governance. And I was doing that because I understood the corporate governance, and by the work I did, I understood, but I needed a certification. So that's why I went to INSEAD
Wow.
after I left office. And I wanted to now serve on boards of global corporates, which I got to know when I was in school. I did my master's in business admin, international business. So I understood how international businesses work. And my doctorate was at University of Phoenix, where we had lecturers that were consulting for Fortune 500 companies. You see a case and you come to class and your professor is actually the consultant on the project. That was awesome. So in that regard, I felt the natural place to go to was INSEAD because my degree was West African, and I went to the US for that reason for Fortune 500 and Global 1000. But I didn't have a European credential, so I chose the INSEAD program on governance.
Wow. That's amazing. If you're joining us, we're talking to Dr. Lucy Newman. This is a leader on the African continent, whether you look at governance, whether you look at the African Free Trade Continental Agreement and what it means for private sector. She is leading conversations in that, and she is just giving us some huge background into where she has come from to be in the offices and the roles, the governance roles, and all the leadership roles she's leading on the African continent. And it's an absolute pleasure having her on the Clarity Mandate. And let's carry on with this conversation. At the peak, Dr. Lucy, of a successful 10-year CEO tenure, you didn't do the obvious next step that everyone will guess, maybe some executive role or some other role. You retired early, took a career break, and went to insert, like you just said, to study corporate governance at the board level. Most leaders don't voluntarily step back, especially in Africa when momentum is like that and you had seen lots of success. What made you certain that that was a right move?
Thank you very much. Incidentally, as you were speaking, I remembered that my special assistant actually ran into my office. I was crying. I was telling me, what have I done? Am I very serious? Some of my family members said, nobody steps away from such a role. It was a very powerful role where you relate with the central bank. The banks are your members and all that. But I felt that in the course of my work for FITC, as I said, I served on the WABA Governing Council, and I also got to engage in the Africa Corporate Governance Network. And that made me travel around Africa. And when I travel, as you and I met at the APRM, we travel not just from airport to hotel. We take road trips, we go to the provinces. And I went to Europe and I saw the things. And my intention to contribute to Africa's trajectory became very strong. And I knew that FITC is Nigeria focused, even though the financial institutions are all over Africa and doing extremely well. So I just took a break to retool myself, refocus. And then I was also at the phase where I was beginning to develop intellectual properties. And I wanted those intellectual properties to be useful to me in my career thereafter. And even being at FITC was a transition for me from PricewaterhouseCoopers because I'd always wanted to be independent consulting. And I saw the work of FITC as giving back to the financial system that I grew up in. And also because the position was contract renewable 5 years, I have chose it as a pathway to no full-time employment. So it's not a sudden break, it's a transition. So, but I also felt that there was a lot of work governance-wise, as I had seen many companies go bad because of poor governance. I've seen the fate of countries go belly up because of governance. I felt I needed to deepen my qualification in that area. And I also wanted to now focus. I read doctorate in business admin. I looked at leadership and performance was my focus. And even in the master's, as I said, I did international business. So now I went to the International Director Certification Program of INSEAD, one of the largest and most prominent business schools in the world, peer-to-peer with Wharton and Harvard. I needed that, and I wanted my credentials to be cross-continental Africa, Americas, and Europe. So in that process, I took that break. At that time also, my youngest son was going into the tertiary institution, mommy's baby, in a new culture, in a new environment, and my second son was completing his university program. I wanted to be sure that the one completing his university program entered the workspace in a very strong footing. And I wanted to make sure that the one that went to university, I was available. So for balance of my parental responsibilities and taking the time off to learn and increase my credentials, I took 2 years career break. It was at the end of those 2 years career break that I met you, Dr. Atud, on a project. My first project for Africa.
Wow, that's amazing. And you hearing her, she's gone ahead after all of that and re-emerging. And Dr. Lucy, you said that Africa's private sector is too fragmented and diverse to be treated as a single block under AfTA implementation, and that what's needed is harmonized sector classification and codification. I'd like you to unpack for our audience what does too fragmented actually mean in practical terms, and what specifically breaks when you look at policymakers. How do they treat the 55 countries worth of business? If you look at treating 55 countries as one block, and you have gone ahead and said, no, this thing needs to be looked at in terms of sectors and audit, I just want you to unpack that for us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atud. This is a beautiful question. It's a bonus question for me because I've been thinking about this about 3 years now. We underestimate the importance of the private sector. And I came to that conclusion when I saw the GDP, the revenue of our global 500. Many of them, the revenue is bigger than our GDP as Africa. And that should not be the case. And also our private sector. That's why I love my work at APSS. We have the Private Sector Bill of Rights. If you look at our businesses in Africa, we have very low mortality rates. The environment is not conducive for the private sector. So the Private Sector Summit, with the support from UNECA and CODA and SAIP and other partners, we developed an evidence-based tool that is called the Private Sector Bill of Rights. At first, it was 23 rights. We now made it 24 based on feedback in the validation processes. Now, those 24 rights are basic conditions that businesses need to thrive and to exist in Africa. And Africa is not likely to get the benefit of the private sector if the countries do not look at these rights and work in making sure that each jurisdiction provides the minimum basic environment to thrive and even to scale, whereby an MSME can get listed in 15 to 20 years. Right now, most of our MSMEs do not survive if the founder. There are so many things involved in that. Then the second aspect again is that our private sector, if you look at the US, you look at Europe, there are sectoral taxonomies and codes. In Africa, if you ask every African country to list their sectors, the names come from all over the place. Now, if we understand big data and analytics, when the foundation is not well stratified, you're going to be flying blind. So for Africa, for instance, I advocate for the 5 sector clusters. Some people call sectors, some people call industries. That's another confusion. In a sector, you have industries, and then you have trade groups. Now, in terms of the sector, they call it primary sector, secondary sector, and all that. For us to scale a fantastic framework as the AfCFTA, I used to say that, imagine with what happened to our issues on AGOA and all the trade issues and the sanctions and tariffs, what would have happened to Africa if there was no AfCFTA? So we have AfCFTA and now we need to scale it. The private sector, many times when they continentally engage the private sector, the invitation is to be major corporates. The MSMEs are not around the table. And most times, the major corporates are comfortable with the states. The problems that the MSMEs face, the big guys don't face it. And many of the big guys also may not realize that the MSMEs are in their value chain. And when they are complaining of cost, if it's well with the MSMEs, the cost will be fine, but we're paying demurrage on inefficiencies in the system. Then in the name of the sectors, our sectors are not designed to scale. I've been advocating for the 5 sectoral categorization. The primary sector being everything extractive from the earth, whether it's from the sea or the land or anything extractive, is the primary sector. The secondary sector is every process that is added to what is extracted to make it either a raw material for further production or the final product, from agro to construction. The tertiary sector is the services that make trade happen and logistics happen. That is finance, transportation, and all the things that you need to make a transaction and trade happen and move goods from A to B to C. Then the fourth sector is the intellectual property, knowledge, technology, where you do research to find out new innovations. Also, you do studies, you learn new methods, and you establish platforms for the activities in the third sector. And the fifth sector is everything law and order, governance and diplomacy, and everything that makes everybody comply. So if you do like that, then when you have an intervention, and the whole continent, when they call primary sector, everybody is in primary. And in primary, if you say it is fisheries, is timber, if it is solid minerals or anything, everybody knows is a process of extraction. Dr. Atud, you and I know the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. So by the time you come to the fifth sector about the governance, you now require, right now, ETI, only about 30 countries in Africa are signed up to ETI. And we're always complaining about solid minerals, rare earth minerals. ETI is a global framework. If everybody signs up to it, you know that the first sector is supposed to have ETI reporting. But because we don't have all these things, and then when you have interventions and the sectors are well stratified, you can go with scientific precision to the specific industry with an mindset, and you can tell what you are doing. And then if you name a sector, you can scale it continentally, regionally, nationally, subnationally, and all that. So that is a major impediment to our scaling up implementation of the AfCFTA. And for us as private sector, the trade groups are very important. We tend to overlook the trade groups. And unfortunately, some of the chambers consider the trade groups as competition. They're actually supposed to be nurturing the trade groups as potential members so that the trade groups are the last and the former small boys that will come up to become big boys tomorrow. And if we have self-governance in the trade associations and trade groups, KYC issues, finance access issues will not be as complicated as we talk about. And then also as we have the industries and then private sector, we can't lump private sector together. Some organizations are just in a location, while some are just organizations are national. Some of them have multiple locations across regions, and some of them are continental. They're not all the same. In the family of animals in the jungle, they're not all the same. The bees are different from the lions and the elephants. So that's why I keep saying that the private sector needs a voice, a very strong voice that is inclusive, that recognizes the diversity and is engaging and mature enough to meet each private sector cluster at its own level. We can't have blanket frameworks for everybody. Everybody is different. And that dichotomy is very important. And if Africa, you see China and Indonesia, they found this magic sauce in the private sector. That's why they are growing. What we don't understand is government does not trade. Only private sector does. And if we treat our private sector right, there will be investments, there will be jobs, tax will be paid, and money will follow where you have clarity, structure, and scalability. Now we don't, and we need to work on that like yesterday.
Wow, that's powerful. You heard her. I told you she's a powerhouse when it comes to private sector advocacy and policy and getting things right on the continent. But let me make a follow-up question on that. The framing private sector bill instead of maybe private sector policy, was it intentional? What does framing it in terms of private sector bill get that just another private sector policy document won't get you?
So the name, the PSBR is actually an acronym. It's called the Charter for Private Sector Development, Protection, and Conducive Environment in Africa. So it's a charter. And some people say Bill of Rights. Does that mean it's a law? Each of these principles that came out and the rights, they're actually not new. They are Regional Economic Community and AfCFTA principles and protocols that have already been approved by the heads of states of the African Union. So what we just did was we extracted the barest minimum that need to be running to make environments conducive. So they're not new. We have reorganized. We just prioritize them and set them, because many of these protocols and principles, there's so many pages and all that. And sometimes because of limited resources, we can't implement all of them at the first time. But these are the ones that are scalable, that have spin-off effects, and have quantum outcomes that can impact what we want to do. And these are well stratified and listed on the APSS website. I invite everybody to go there. And we also have a QR code, which I would give, that has access to a community that we have. And I spoke about how we built our community at FITC to 1,500 organizations members. The same thing with APSS does not work alone. APSS has partners, and it thrives in an ecosystem of similar organizations that have similar concerns, or also their members have interests in the things that we do. And three strong key members. We also have the African Business Council, and we also have the African Education Trust Fund. And then we have our very special partner, the AAA, All Africa Association of Small and Medium Enterprises, that we have partnered with along the way. We also have the African Integration Think Tank and many others that are in the ecosystem. So when APSS shows up, it does not show up alone. It comes along with other likely organizations.
Wow, that's so, so powerful. And that's the power of collaboration because, like you say, you can't do it alone. And you were the first African elected director on the IS Global Board, representing members across 48 countries outside of the US. And you now sit on corporate board yourself. What is the most common governance gap that you see in African boardrooms? What is the thing that, if fixed, would change a lot of the outcomes?
Between the executive and the non-executives, that we are all in pursuit of the same goals. That for progress, there must be trust. And then vulnerability can happen. And when vulnerability happens, then you can see the real problem and you can address it. So maybe because in Africa, saving face is very important. People are not very eager to be vulnerable, and they don't ask all the questions, and everybody thinks the other person is out to get me. So, but that is, if I have an opportunity, I do advise boards as well. So if I have an opportunity, one of the first things I do is team building on the board to make sure that everybody has relaxed and they trust, and then we can see that we're all on the same team. That's one. And the second side is the aspect about, because of that vulnerability, people who don't know something, they may not come forward and say, I don't know. So having a board evaluation is very important. And then the feedback is discreet, one-on-one, and they can all work on their improvement plans. But above all, there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of relaxation and enjoyment, and then also things move along. Africa has come a very, very long way in terms of governance practice. All thanks to King Report. King Report 1234. And that has been a very good aspect. And then in terms of the political governance, is the reawakening of the citizenry on their rights and the things they can demand. So Africa is emerging in terms of governance. I only wish it will be faster. And unfortunately, private sector seems to be ahead of the pack, above the non-governmental and the political. I also had the privilege of being at the table when they were developing the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance, the first phase. And I saw a lot of resistance. People saw it as not good for them, but they didn't see that it is investment in their own sustainability.
Wow. That's powerful because sometimes people think governance is out to catch them and all that. And I love the gap that you actually highlighted. I hope every leader listening out there would want to really go back to your board and see what are the dynamics, what are the skills gap, what is the trust gap, and how do we actually work on those things so that we can move Africa's corporate governance to higher levels of growth and actually doing the work that they sit there to do, especially the gap between the executive and the non-executive members. I love that you actually highlighted that. Thanks, Dr. Newman. Let's move on.
There's another one that I missed. I missed one, executive succession. Most times succession is avoided or there's vested interest and is really very, very independent. If we can do that, that is the best thing that can happen to many organizations. If the board can see its role as responsible for objective, high quality executive succession, that would be very good. With every member realizing that you're there as a tenure and what will be your legacy when you leave.
Wow. I love that word, legacy, knowing that you are there for a particular time and you have a mandate to fulfill. And what will be the legacy that you want the next executive coming after you to carry on with? Thanks, Dr. Newman, for really highlighting that point on executive succession. But I want us to shift gear. You have spoken about African women's leadership. You've talked about moving from individual success to ecosystem building. I love the word ecosystem, and you've used it time and time again, I think intentionally on this podcast. That impact increases when leadership stops being about personal achievement and starts being about systems around her. What does the shift actually looks like in practice? And what does a woman leader have to give up for that shift to actually happen on the continent?
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting one. I usually talk about cat fights and collaboration. Women are naturally very competitive. The queen bee has to be the only bee in the hive. Every other bee has to submit to the queen bee. But women have peculiarity in their life cycle stages. And those life cycle stages, you need the support of other people who understand those life cycle stages. And you also need a network that can be your resource base for information on how to manage those life cycle stages. You also need a resource base to advocate for the conditions you would like to help you walk through that life cycle stages. And that is a very important thing. And when I was in active full-time executive position, and whenever I find myself playing consultancy roles where I am responsible for policies as regards employees and stakeholders, I always bring the issue of, if you look at a woman at a point in time, you might have the wrong perspective. You have to look at her over a series of years to really decide the value she adds. Because first of all, she's a young girl, she's a school teenager, she's a graduate. She becomes a nursing mother. That beautiful, intelligent young lady starts coming in late and she starts giving excuses of going to the clinic to take her children. If you look at her at that time and you think she's not worth it, then you have lost the future executive that is going to be very intelligent and value added and a fantastic leader because she's used to leading her family. So, and then also later in life, when she has become a matriarch, when she has brought up other leaders, she makes a very good mentor. So for you to really get the full value of a woman, you need to look at her across at least a decade.
I love the word you use, life cycle, and every stage in the life cycle demands different focus and different responsibilities, and it demands leaders to look at the woman with different spares of specs, if I like to put it that way. But this show, the Clarity Mandate, is broadcast across 50 countries now and growing. And someone listening to us amongst our audience, an entrepreneur that will be listening to this episode, whether it's in Lagos, in Nairobi, in Accra, or in the diaspora, and here's the word AA, and isn't sure if it's actually relevant to them yet or just a policy conversation for governments and large corporates, give them 2 or 3 things that they should actually be doing, maybe in the next 90 days, to position themselves for what the air has possibility for on the continent.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atud, and congratulations to you and your team on the spread and the scope and the reach of the Clarity Mandate. Huge congratulations on that. In terms of what people should do, number one, visit the AfCFTA website. Find out your country's national coordination office and try to connect with them. Mandate number 2, if you live in Africa, go to the All Africa Small and Medium Enterprises website. It's a continental group. Find your region and your national coordinator and try to register. Number 2, find out about the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which is a beautiful platform developed by our wonderful Afrexim Bank, which enables you to trade in your commodities in your country, ship across Africa, and get paid in your bank in your own currency without a third currency conversion necessity. The third one, find out the Africa Trade Gateway. Africa Trade Gateway is like a marketplace where service demands are listed, and you can now have to see which services you can meet, and if you meet those potentials, you can bid for those, and nobody knows anything can happen. As a diaspora person, try and connect with your national diaspora office to see what opportunities exist for you as a diaspora to contribute to your country's transformation. Our continent, Africa, has now added the 6th region, which is the diaspora region. And to demonstrate that, the AU even has a whole unit that relates with the diaspora. And for us in APSS, we're actually structured along the 5+1 geographic regions, and each of those regions has a deputy chair. We actually have somebody for the diaspora African. His name is Mr. Gerard Cooper. He lives in DC area. So that is very important. And then a bonus suggestion is visit the APSS website, is Africa Private Sector Summit.org, and explore and be a member of the community. When you fill the form, tell us your background and tell us what you want. And once in a while, we do come up with programs, and we sort our database by cluster of people in a particular area, and you might just be called for something. We never know. We just signed up about 5 volunteers that are going to join APSS. And as I said, is a cluster of like-minded organizations.
Wow, that's powerful. If you're listening, you're an entrepreneur, you are in the diaspora, you are on the continent, go back and listen to what Dr. Newman just said about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and how you can position your organization. She just listed a lot of things that I would like you to go and listen and see what its practical next step for you at this moment, because we want an Africa, whether you are on the continent, you are in the diaspora, we make these things a reality. And it's crazy. It looks so far, but we are actually in it. And let's all get on board and see how far we can take this continent. But the name of this podcast is called Clarity Mandate, and so intentional because Dr. Lucy, you've talked about professional courage. You've talked about wisdom, you've talked about evidence, and the things that are really essential for institutions. Talk about integrity. And I believe that all these things that you say captures something that many leaders really sometimes really grabs, that clarity without courage, that you're not just talking about analysis, you're not just talking about courage without wisdom, and you're not just talking about reckless kind of leadership across decades. From your experience working from the banks to global consulting and back to building institutions and rebuilding them from inside up, what have you learned about the exact combination of whether you're looking at integrity, you're looking at wisdom, you're looking at all these things that you have talked about? What does it feel like? What does it cost you actually to become who you are right now?
Thank you very much. Sometimes you need to walk away from some things. Sometimes you need to decide that this is not my space. I need to walk away. I've done that a couple of times over my career. Sometimes also, if it's very important for you, like my father used to say, your most precious real estate is your name. Some people join a queue and they hear your name and they just say, come right ahead. Some people are paying for some things and they hear your name and it's, you're exempted, come, it's for free. Your name is very important. And if integrity is very important to you, and that is primary, and you find yourself working with the leader who is not very ethical, you need to decide to walk away. Because if you hang around for too long, you might need to explain why you're comfortable on that team. Were you a facilitator? Were you an enabler of illicit things? The second thing again is delayed gratification. If you learn to look at things in a wholesome manner and not be too transactional, it helps. Then also when you relate with people, you can look at people where they are today, but you can look at them also where they could be and how you are part of that, their journey to where they should be. And if you know your role, then it all adds up. But if you count integrity and ethics to be your key matter, you are an endangered species. You are among the few. And you need to try as much as possible to stand for what you say. What I find, I do that. There's a slide I use in my leadership trainings, and I have one which is don't ask people to do what you don't believe and what they cannot see. And in that picture, I have the picture of a US Marine teaching his children press ups. So if you can't demonstrate press ups, you can't demonstrate what you're doing, it's not going to work. The other one is I have an image of somebody with 3 different masks. For you to be an effective leader, you need to be somebody that people can predict, people know where you stand on anything, even before you speak. Sometimes there are times that my name has been called for a role, and they say, hey, this woman, no, we don't want her here. She's going to come and rock the boat. And for me, that is a compliment. When people see it as a missed opportunity, I'm like, fantastic. So just because of whom you are, some people will pay a premium to have you on the table because that is the kind of person they want. So it's okay to be different and unique and to stand on your principles. Then the other thing is that as a leader, people come to you and they're vulnerable to you. As a leader, you need to allow people the space to be vulnerable and to know that there are no harm based on the information that's not accessible to you. And for that, I have a slide which licking it can become breakfast. So those are things that for us as leaders we need to guard. And it's so sad that in my mentorship relationships, I hear so much when people say we are getting fewer and fewer people that can stand as ethical leaders. And we have a large population of youth in Africa. Many of them have good heart. Many of them are very intelligent and creative. They just want a role model that they can stand and they can explain themselves and that can walk the path with them. And the more African leaders are willing to stand like that, the better it is for us. That's why when I wrote my book, one section I committed it to the individual, and I took a case study of an African diaspora living in Los Angeles that has worked for Fortune 500 trying to reach out to his country in Uganda.
Wow. That's powerful. Thanks for sharing, Dr. Newman. Just any closing thoughts as we round up? Maybe what you're working on, what's next for Dr. Lucy? Do we have a book coming up or anything you want to share as we round up?
Yes, I have two books coming up. One book is the next step after my book, African Leaders Tete-a-Tete, reflecting on my journey in the past 5 years and what I have seen, and then looking at the future for Africa, especially the need for leadership to engage and invest in youth and education, and also the welfare of our people in line with Ubuntu philosophy. The other book is on parenting, using the metaphor of gardening. So these are the other things, but I'm trying to work on APSS transitioning and also our regional hubs getting stronger and our partnerships being very strong, and also on APSS playing a closer role with the AfCFTA Secretariat and other continental bodies. We recently got succession done in APSS, and I'm very delighted about that. I went to APSS as CEO, and I always take succession serious. So immediately after about 2 years, I presented a plan for my succession and the board approved. Now we have a CEO who is a Ugandan in his 40s, and we have a COO, a Nigerian who is in his 40s. And I just say we just onboarded 5 young Africans, and then also the board membership with different regions. So building APSS to be sustainable, if I need to step away as a chair, is very important. I don't know when I will step away, but I want it to be ready by that time. And the 5+1 deputy chairs that we have, one of them might succeed me if I choose to move away.
Wow, that is powerful. That is powerful. And you just see the kind of leader that Dr. Newman is. It's not about herself, it's always about the institution. And she is so intentional in making sure that the systems that need to be in place for sustainability are there. And thanks for sharing. This has been Dr. Lucy Newman, who built her career the way she built institutions, deliberately, structurally, and with the courage to walk away from any career into a bigger mandate whenever it is required of her. From the bank treasury desks, building to a 1,570 member continental network, from a decade at the top of one institution to the boardroom of now shaping how the air becomes real to the private sector. You have spent 40 years almost, in my estimation, providing and proving that Africa's transformation will be built on one well-designed institution at a time. We need Africa's institutions to be designed the way that they should be to do and deliver what they are meant to deliver. And that is so great, Dr. Lucy. And to every leader listening out there in our audience, and you're building something, a company, a coalition, a continental organization that is worth of any kind of trade infrastructure, the mandate is clear. You heard Dr. Lucy. You need some professional courage. You need to apply some wisdom with evidence. And guess what? You don't need to make it personal. It's about the institution. It's a disciplined, and now you need to go out and listen to the full episode and begin to implement some of the tips and some of the things that she said. And you want to find Dr. Newman's work. You want to look at her private website. We'll put the details in the show notes. And you want to look at the African Private Sector Summit website and every other website that she has actually shared. We'll put the details in the show notes. And I am Dr. Vivian Atud, and this has been the Clarity Mandate.